Hey guys, you're watching QDCrafts, and for the longest time you guys have been asking me how I iron my perler beads. It's one of the trickiest parts to this craft because it's really easy to overmelt your beads and ruin the whole project, but it's also kind of tricky for me to explain exactly how I do it since my iron is probably different from yours. Now this video is all about how I do things, so it may be different from what others do and what you will eventually do, especially if you're still trying to improve your ironing. Please don't forget that there are many contributing factors that may affect how well a perler bead sprite is fused, like the brand of beads that you're using and the type of iron, so please don't expect to be able to completely replicate my results since everyone has a different ironing setup. But anyway, let's get started and hopefully you'll learn something from my ironing methods that you may apply to your own. The iron that I use to fuse all of my perler bead projects is this Black & Decker iron that my mom has had for 20 years, so I don't know if you can actually find this in store anymore, but anyway, it has 7 different settings like this, and usually I set my iron to number 3, which is medium, and the polyester setting for this iron. For much larger projects, I like to turn the heat up a bit to around 4, but never more than that, and then for mini bead projects, I would usually go with 1. Once my iron has preheated for around 5 minutes, I can usually feel the heat around this area, and it doesn't actually feel like it's burning hot, it's more like a warm, toasty feeling. So that's when I know I'm ready to iron. As always, I'm getting some parchment paper or ironing paper so that I can fuse the beads, and the project I'm working on today is Litten from Pokemon Sun and Moon. It's actually the starter that I chose, so if you also chose Litten, tell me in the comments below. The first thing that I have to do before ironing is to prepare the project using some masking tape or painter's tape, which are really not that sticky and will peel off easily later in the process. All I'm doing is covering the entire project with tape and making sure that all of the beads are securely stuck on it and will hopefully not fall off later on when I flip the project over. I've seen people poke holes using a sharp object or a pen through the tape and through every single bead as a part of this method, but I haven't really seen a significant benefit to this, in my projects at least, so I'm just going to flip the project over and begin the ironing process right away. You can definitely try poking holes if you have the time, but I'm just saying that I usually wouldn't do it, and it saves me a lot of time and effort, especially if I don't really notice any difference to it. Now I'm just placing my ironing paper on top of Litten, making sure everything's covered, and here's a close-up of what the beads look like before ironing. Once the beads are heated, you'll see them stick onto the paper, and that's when you know that they're fusing. Alright, so this is a real-time clip of me ironing Litten to give you an idea of how long it takes for me to iron a perler bead sprite of this size. You can see exactly how I'm moving the iron, and it's pretty much just in a circular motion so that all of the beads will melt together around the same time. The Perler company's instructions for ironing state that it should usually take around 20 to 30 seconds just to fuse one side, but my heat setting is actually relatively low, which makes it take a lot longer just to fuse one side. The benefit of me keeping my ironing setting this low is that there's a much lower chance of me over ironing my project, which is good. I definitely have more control, and it's easier to judge when to stop ironing because I can see the beads slowly becoming darker and sticking onto the ironing paper. Generally, I want all the beads to melt at the same time so that the sprite will be even and not over-ironed in certain areas and under-ironed in others, but I should note that some parts will melt quicker at times than others, as you can see here where some beads are already fused onto the paper while others aren't fused yet. Usually it should be fine because I make sure to always keep my iron moving to different spots, and I also apply some additional pressure to the iron sometimes if certain parts are still not fused yet. This is the part where I can't really explain what to do because you don't know how hard and how much pressure I'm applying onto the perler bead sprite. You have to just figure this out yourself when you try it and get a feel for it. The only way to improve your perler bead ironing is to practice it. And once you get the hang of it, I'm sure that you can achieve results that are very similar to mine. Once you see a solid imprint of the beads on the ironing paper, you can see the colors really clearly. I'm just flipping it over, taking off all the tape, and doing the exact same thing that I did before on the other side. So this should usually take around the same time as it did for the first side. And again, I'm just applying a little bit of pressure, moving the iron in a circular motion and making sure that I go over every single bead and making all of them fuse together. Before I forget, I should also mention where I learned this masking tape method from. I think there's a channel called Danthal42 that also has some perler bead videos on it, and he was one of the original perler bead YouTubers, I think. There weren't that many at the time, so that's where I learned how to iron these perler beads so well, and using this masking tape method. He does it differently than I do, of course, because I've eventually found my own way to do it, and I think you guys can do the same. You can just use this as a bit of a tip and guide, but you don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing to perfect your perler bead ironing. I think this linen is coming along very well. It looks like most of the beads are already fused. You can see that there's a solid color and solid lines on these perler beads. And I'm just gonna get something really heavy like this chemistry book to squash it. Or if I'm impatient, which I am right now, I can kind of just take off the ironing paper on both sides at the same time. I don't know if this actually helps in keeping the perler bead sprite even, but I know that every single time I peel it like this, it seems less likely for the perler bead sprite to warp towards one side. So it's pretty flat overall. Just to be completely sure, I'd still put something really heavy on top of it to make sure that it won't bend any further as it cools. And that is all there is to it. This is what I would consider a perfectly ironed perler bead sprite. It's pretty flat, everything's even, and I just want to show you the difference between an ironed and unironed perler bead. The ironed perler bead is about the same thickness as the white one, as you can see. That's why I keep my heat setting pretty low and only apply a little bit of pressure. This is what I like to have as the thickness for a perler bead sprite, and you can adjust that if you want, but that's my masking tape method. Now I'll be showing you how I iron perler beads directly on the pegboard. I want to point out that this rowlet sprite here is very round and doesn't actually have many protruding elements to it. So in this case, I would be comfortable ironing directly on the pegboard since the beads are less likely to be misplaced, and I'll show you what I mean later on if it doesn't really make sense right now. The only difference with ironing a sprite on the pegboard is that I have to be extra careful when moving the iron and holding down the ironing paper. Without the masking tape base that I would have used to hold the beads in place while ironing, it is much more likely for the beads to move or get tipped over if I accidentally lift the ironing paper and cause some of the beads to go out of place. That's why I have to keep my iron pressed onto the sprite at all times, hold the ironing paper down, and also try not to lift the iron at any time because it would risk displacing the beads. If you're a beginner who hasn't really gotten the hang of ironing perler beads yet, I'd stick with using masking tape because it's just less troublesome since the beads are less likely to move, and you also eliminate the chance of making your pegboards warp out of shape, which I have heard does happen to people. I personally have never had a problem with ironing directly on the board, probably because I keep my heat setting not so high, and also because after I iron one of the sides and flip the sprite over, I press down on the pegboard a bit and keep it face down when it's cooling. It's just like keeping a fused sprite flat. If I find that a pegboard is slightly bending, I try to push down on the side that it's bending up to, and in a way push it back to being flat. This is just what I do every single time, and I haven't had a problem. I think you get the idea now, and hopefully those little tips that I mentioned earlier will help with your ironing. Now to finish off this rowlet sprite, I'm putting a very heavy object on it to keep it flat. And let's take a look at my pegboard that is now cooled. You see that there's no bend in it anymore. It's perfectly fine, reusable, good for many more perler bead projects. But I want to mention one observation that I made in my years of ironing. You'll never ever see me directly iron on one of those clear pegboards, you know, the ones that you can see through. I don't know if it's the plastic in the clear one, but when I ironed directly on the clear pegboards, they would warp so easily, even though my iron is at the same heat setting as it would be for when I iron on the yellow pegboards. I don't know why this happens, but it's just something to take note of and maybe remember when you're ironing. Peeling the ironing paper off of Perler bead sprites is one of my favorite sounds, and you'll hear it in my Satisfying Perler bead Moments compilation if you haven't seen that video already. And again, it turned out great. It's flat, and the thickness of the iron beads is not far from an unironed Perler bead, which means that ironing went well. You may think that there's not a big difference between ironing directly versus ironing with the help of masking tape, but there is as you make larger and larger projects. I might have to do another ironing video for my large Perler bead projects, so tell me if you're interested in that, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys understand the basics of how I iron Perler beads first. And remember how I said rowlet has a round shape and would be suitable to iron directly on the pegboard? Well, let's look at a bunch of different sprites and think about which method I would use. Of course, if you're a beginner, I'd recommend just going with masking tape, but at least you can see how I make my decisions when it comes to different Perler bead projects and ironing them. For sprites that aren't too complicated and are kind of simple and small, I would just go with a direct fuse like I did for this Mario star. But then more complicated projects like Litten have these dangerous parts where it could potentially mess up, so masking tape. And just like this Google T-Rex, I never used masking tape on it, so I probably should have done that. A Mario mushroom, really round, very simple, I would just go with direct fuse. Link, I could go with a direct fuse or masking tape depending on my comfort zone. I remember for this one, I just directly fused it on the pegboard and there wasn't any problem. Saitama, so round, I would definitely just directly fuse it. Smaller projects, again, Pikachu, Fennekin, really simple, I would just directly fuse it on the pegboard again. And Frogadier, which is kind of like Litten with this protruding part, I would use masking tape. And then large projects like this Tails, most definitely I would use masking tape to help me out because I really don't want to mess this up. Fire Kirby has some complicated parts at the top and it's really big, almost taking up the whole pegboard, so I would use masking tape for this. Goku, again with some spiky parts and it's super long, I used 2 pegboards to make this, most definitely masking tape. And lastly, with this Happy Face, it's just another round, simple sprite. I would just directly fuse this. Alright guys, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Now that you've seen how I iron my Perler beads, it's time for you to go out and practice this all for yourself. Make a whole bunch of different sprites and iron them. See which setting is good for you on your iron. If it's a little too hot, just turn it down. And if it's not hot enough, just turn it up. You just have to change things up, change your method, and that way you can develop your own judgment and technique when it comes to ironing Perler beads nicely. Before I go, I just want to show you my first Perler bead project. It is this Pikachu here, and the front side looks pretty alright. It's a nice fuse and everything is good. But then back side, oh no, it's kind of like over ironed. And definitely it took me so many tries to get it right. I made so many different sprites over the years, and in that way I got a lot of practice in ironing. And of course different people have different tastes in ironing, so maybe one day I'll do a video on the different types of fuses. There's like a hard fuse where it looks completely pixelized. There's a regular fuse, also one where you just iron on one side and then flip it over to the side that's completely unironed. Watching a video of me iron Perler beads will not make you perfect at ironing. You have to really just try it out yourself, go practice it. And if you're really young, definitely ask a parent to help you out because you may not have that much control over an iron yet. It's really all about trial and error, and once you get it down, then you'll make a lot of really cool Perler bead sprites and they'll look amazing. So thank you again for watching. I hope you took something out of this video, and if there's anything I missed or you want more information on, just leave a comment down below. For now, I have some more projects planned. Please stay tuned, check out all my social media down below, and I will see you next time with another QDCraft.